Thanks very much, Mark. And I should begin by issuing a genuine thank you to the PFNI for this invitation. I say that because, as Mark has said, I have some background in working very closely with the police, and my admiration and respect for those who don a policing uniform knows no bounds. And I say that in the light that we know this attempted murder, this deliberate, calculated attempted murder of one of your colleagues, one of your comrades, over the weekend, was designed to drag Northern Ireland backwards. And that cannot be allowed. But my sympathies go out to the individual. My respect goes out to you and your colleagues, because I know that every one of you is expected to take that generalised risk on behalf of society, and we must say that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable in any part of this United Kingdom of ours. It's not acceptable in the kind of world that we want to bring. I say that as well in the recognition of the murder recently of Lyra McKee. I was at Lyra's funeral the other week. A very sad occasion, and that of itself was devastating as an outrage, but I do want to first of all congratulate the PSNI for the work that is being done as a result of that, because that really does matter. I also want to say this, though, of course, is that the intended victim was almost certainly again one of your colleagues, and that we should bring to mind. If I go back slightly, when the bomb went off at the courthouse in Derry, of course, at that time, and I say this quite rightly, the people who ran forward were your colleagues, people who were there to make the public feel secure at a time when people like myself would rightly have been running in the other direction, because that's what we expect of our blue light services, but foremost amongst them, of course, is policing. So we expect a lot of our policing service. We expect a lot, I think, of the PSNI in particular. You've been on a journey over the years since the PSNI was formed. It's a very different institution to its predecessors. Change comes, again, a new Chief Constable. I actually do want to, at this point, place on record my own thanks, my own recognition of the work of the existing Chief Constable. Finishes at the end of this month, but a real thank you on behalf of the whole of our nation for the work that George has done for the people of Northern Ireland, but actually for the people of the whole of the United Kingdom over his years of service and the role as Chief Constable. But a new Chief Constable is on his way in, a new police board. I must say in passing, I think it was disgraceful that the police board didn't exist for a time, and I'll come on to that in a moment, a new policing ombudsman. And Mark, you're absolutely right to say that these structures are all part of the structures of accountability that modern policing has to be part of, to embrace, not necessarily always to fall in love with, but to embrace, because accountability, transparency is at the very centre of what modern policing is all about. Policing in the end, I know of no police officer who's ever told me I'm wrong on this, because I learnt this from police officers. Policing has to be centred in communities. It has to be neighbourhood policing, the best kind of policing, whether it's solving persistent bike crime, whether it's solving the theft of ATMs, whether it's solving the most serious crimes, organised criminality, whether it's about terrorism, is successful when it's embedded and located in that neighbourhood, that community police. And that's the model of policing I believe in. It's the model of policing that makes a difference in Greater Manchester, where the situation of organised crime is not dissimilar to the kind of issues you face here in Northern Ireland. It still is embedded in that local knowledge, that local police structure. And that matters enormously, I think, because in the end, that neighbourhood policing only works if the public has confidence in what our police service does. And that's something that is not simply precious. It's an asset that where you've got it, you cherish it, and where it's not there strong enough. And we know in all parts of our societies. Come to Greater Manchester, I know of areas where young people still find it difficult to trust to work with the police. You face similar kinds of challenges, and we've got to work together to overcome those challenges, but confidence in policing matters. And that's why those things that jolt that confidence are so difficult. And Mark, you've referred to legacy, and you're absolutely right, legacy still carries a heavy burden in Northern Ireland. I'm very conscious of the challenge of that legacy, in particular when we look at the need for historical investigations, the question of this historical investigations unit. I think that is best done separate from the PSNI, I must say, if that's because in the end, first of all, I think there is genuinely enough to be doing in modern policing in Northern Ireland that the PSNI ought to be that dedicated force for the here and now, but also, as well, actually separating the investigation of the past from investigation of the present keeps the PSNI in a very different position in those issues. But there are challenges from the past. And again, Mark, I agree with you. There can never be any suggestion of equivalence between things that happened over that time, the actions that were committed by paramilitary groups, by terrorists, were just that. They are illegal by their very nature. They still deserve investigation. But I do want to say this, and this is always quite a difficult argument. We know there's a growing demand, probably more centred around our armed forces rather than policing, interestingly, around the question of statute of limitations. I don't believe that we should have a statute of limitations for those crimes of the past, those most serious crimes of the past. And I'll tell you why, partly, like everybody in this room, I've sat down and listened to victims of the most horrendous crimes over the years. Victims, their families, deserve a knowledge that the judicial process is there to support them in their own journeys through life. Victims, I think a victim-centred policy does matter. Making sure our processes are victim-centred really does matter. But I think there's a bigger issue at stake, and it is about reputation. I think it's right and proper to say that the overwhelming majority of police officers who went out to uphold the law, who went out to serve what our society expected of them, don't deserve to be compared with that very small minority of people within whatever service who broke the law and who, in breaking the law, betrayed the confidence and trust that society places in all of you. And that's why I don't think there should be statute of limitations. That's sometimes a tough message because it's easy to take a different route. In the same way, if we're to develop that sense of long-term confidence in policing, I want a police force that does stand up and can stand up, and you can, and say that the PSNI is there to serve people from all backgrounds, all communities. The PSNI is a service committed to upholding that rule of law that we hold so dear and that you swear an oath to protect. Controversy is in the very nature of modern policing. I'm bound to say the question that's come up recently of Trevor Burney and Barry McCaffrey, the two journalists recently that the High Court has resolved. Clearly, that questions will be asked about the role of the PSNI, and that's bound to be there, and that's why those issues of transparency and accountability to the policing board are so important in making sure that the public has confidence that the decisions that policing makes are the right decisions, or in any case that the police have to account for those right kinds of decisions. That's not to challenge policing. Policing has to be independent of politicians. Policing has to be accountable to society most generally, and that's an important message. But as I say, I repeat, in the end, the solidity of what the PSNI is now achieving, I think, is there to be seen. The change in Northern Ireland, even with all the challenges you face, is there to be seen. I do want, though, to come on to this question of policing numbers, because if you go back to my comments earlier on about about neighbourhood policing, community policing, one of the things that I'm convinced of is that policing has not got the numbers, not here in Northern Ireland, not in my own city region, to do the job that we expect, but nor in a period of austerity, as police got the partnerships. And Mark, you referred to mental health. I've seen this many times in Greater Manchester when I was the Police and Crime Commissioner, the absolute certain knowledge that when somebody with serious mental health issues was causing nuisance on the streets, causing nuisance maybe to their own family, in the absence of strong mental health service, the first people on that scene are going to be a police officer. And the amount of time police officers spend here in Northern Ireland dealing with mental health issues, and let me say this not rudely, you're not competent to do this. What you are competent to do is to solve the initial disturbance, but then to transfer to, and you ought to be able to transfer to strong mental health services, working in partnership with those services like mental health, and working in partnership with the other public services means that we do need to see an end to austerity. We do need to see an end to a situation where our public services are not resourced in a way to allow you to do your job. Because in the end, yes, of course, we can run a blue light service that simply responds to crisis. But if we're going to solve the problems that society needs solving, policing does it best by working with other public agencies to deliver the long-term solutions, the long-term change that we need. And that, of course, does mean that we need to see the Northern Ireland Executive back in power. We need to see politicians taking responsibility for the things, whether it's in Westminster, whether it's in Stormont, for the things that you need them to do. But that, in the end, does need numbers. Now, I just want to say a few words, if I may. I'm bound to touch on this question of Brexit. I'm committed, and I will do everything I can to prevent a hard border across the island of Ireland. There are those in both communities I know who, for the extremes, who would like to see that return to a hard border, those who were never reconciled in the first place to its disappearance, those who want to see its return so that they can use this as a political gambit, a recruiting sergeant for terrorism or whatever else it may be. I want to resist that at any cost. I want to make sure that we don't return to the days when you're dealing with smuggling, but actually I don't want to see the days returning when we do see you spending more time dealing with terrorism than dealing with the normalcy that we expect policing to do in a modern society. But actually, Brexit does create other challenges. It means that the use, for example, of things like the European arrest warrant, access to things like ECRIS, the European Criminal Records and Information System, making sure that we can work with Europol. Those things really do matter to modern policing. I think it's true that the Northern Ireland Police Service has used access to the arrest warrant more than any other police force across the United Kingdom. We need to make sure that post-Brexit, whatever the outcome is, and you'll have different views on what that outcome should be, that we can still make sure we've got access to the things that make a real difference for your capacity to keep our communities safe. I want to just finish by saying, as I started, there are challenges to policing in Northern Ireland. Of course there are. There are challenges from the past. There are challenges on a day-to-day basis, still of terrorism, of organised crime, of the normalcy that police forces deal with all over the United Kingdom. We expect, society expects, people like yourselves, your colleagues, to take on a huge challenge, a huge burden. Society ought to be respectful of what you do. Society ought to recognise that, as I said before, that when crisis comes, it's you and your colleagues who will be moving forward while the rest of us are moving out of the way. So I want to conclude by giving a very sincere thank you to everybody for what you do, and through you to your colleagues, because actually policing in the modern world will always be challenged, will always be challenging. It's people like yourselves who are more professional in this generation than in any other generation of policing. People like yourselves who've changed what the face of policing looks like in Northern Ireland. People like yourselves who are delivering that modern police service that's fit for a modern Northern Ireland, who deserve our thanks and gratitude. So thank you for listening, but thank you for what you do on a daily basis.